The world of airlines is often a mystery to most passengers. From the moment you step onto a plane, you're surrounded by smiling faces, uniforms, and a promise of luxury and comfort. But have you ever wondered what it's really like behind the scenes? Imagine this. You're a passenger, seated comfortably in a first-class cabin, only to overhear something shocking. What if those stewardesses who have been tending to your every need have been talking about their boss, someone you've never seen before? Someone who is no stranger to the airline industry, but whose identity is hidden in plain sight. Meet the undercover owner of a major airline. Let's call him Jack. Jack has always been a man of mystery, someone who prefers to stay in the shadows while his airline continues to thrive. He's heard the rumors, the whispers, the complaints from both customers and staff, but he's never really seen the truth for himself. Sure, he's rich, successful, and powerful, but as he sits at the helm of his empire, he begins to wonder, do the people working for him truly respect him? Or is there something deeper going on behind closed doors? To find out, Jack decides to take matters into his own hands. Instead of simply reading through customer feedback or conducting standard meetings with management, he decides to do something radical. He books a VIP seat on one of his own airline's flights, choosing to go undercover as a regular passenger. The goal is clear: to experience the flight just like everyone else, to see what the service is really like, and most importantly, to hear what the staff really think of him. As the flight takes off, Jack settles into his seat, trying to blend in with the other high-profile passengers. The stewardesses, two of the most experienced and well-liked on the team, move about the cabin with precision, their conversations light and full of smiles. Jack watches them carefully, all while wondering, how much do they really know about the man behind the airline? It doesn't take long before the first hint of tension starts to creep in. A comment here, a remark there, and suddenly, Jack's curiosity deepens. The stewardesses, so friendly to the customers, begin to speak about the airline's management, specifically about the owner. Their words aren't kind, their tone far from respectful. They talk about how out of touch he is with the day-to-day workings of the airline, how his decisions often feel disconnected from reality, and how they've grown frustrated with his lack of involvement. But what truly shakes Jack to the core is not just their words, it's the way they speak about him. The owner of the airline, someone they've never met, yet someone they clearly have strong opinions about. And they have no idea that he's sitting right there, watching, listening. His heart pounds in his chest. This wasn't supposed to happen. He wasn't supposed to be a part of their conversation. As the flight continues, Jack can't shake the feeling that he's not just hearing complaints from his employees, but a deeper sense of betrayal. These are people who represent his brand, people who he thought respected him. But what if he was wrong? What if they've been hiding their true feelings all along? The conversation escalates as the stewardesses, unaware of Jack's presence, continue to air their frustrations. They reveal secrets about the airline's inner workings, about problems that have been ignored for years. But just as Jack is about to confront them, one of the stewardesses drops a bombshell that leaves him speechless. She mentions something that could change everything. Something about Jack's role in the airline's most recent crisis, something he never expected. Before Jack can react, the plane begins its descent, and the stewardesses hurry to prepare for landing. Jack is left in a whirlwind of emotions, grappling with the shock of what he's just learned. But what happens next? How will he face the truth about his own airline and the people he thought he could trust? Stay tuned as Jack faces the toughest decision of his life, all while trying to keep his identity hidden and figure out how to make things right before it's too late. What will happen when the truth finally comes out, and will the airline and Jack ever be the same again? As the plane gently touched down, Jack's mind raced. He wasn't sure whether he was more stunned by what he'd just overheard or by the fact that he'd been so close to the truth, yet still had so much left to uncover. The stewardesses rushed to finish their duties, securing trays and straightening up the cabin, completely oblivious to the fact that their boss was sitting just a few rows behind them, struggling to process the conversation he had just eavesdropped on. Jack leaned back in his seat, trying to maintain his composure. His heart was pounding in his chest, and he could feel the sweat beginning to bead on his forehead. He had been prepared for a little bit of criticism, maybe even some mild complaints, but nothing could have prepared him for the depth of the animosity he had just witnessed. He had always prided himself on his ability to stay detached from the day-to-day operations of his airline, letting his trusted team handle the details. But now, with the stewardess's words echoing in his mind, he couldn't help but feel like he had made a mistake, perhaps a big one. When the plane finally came to a stop and the passengers began to stand and collect their belongings, Jack stayed seated, waiting for the chaos of the disembarkation to die down. He needed time to think, to figure out what to do next. What should his next move be? Should he confront the stewardesses right here, in front of everyone, or should he wait until he could have a private conversation with them? The latter seemed like the smarter option, but part of him wanted to confront them immediately. He had spent years building this airline, and now it felt as though it was slipping through his fingers. The thought of losing control over his own creation was terrifying. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the last passenger had exited the plane. Jack took a deep breath and stood up, his legs a little shaky as he made his way off the aircraft. As he stepped into the terminal, he couldn't shake the sense of unease that had settled over him. There was something about the stewardess's words that gnawed at him, something that felt too personal. It wasn't just about the airline or their complaints, it felt like a betrayal. He had always believed in the importance of transparency and communication with his team, but now he was beginning to question whether he had been too distant, too focused on the big picture, and not enough on the people who were actually making his business run. Jack made his way to the VIP lounge, trying to push his troubling thoughts aside. He needed a moment to collect himself, to figure out what steps to take next. He ordered a drink and sat down, his mind spinning. The two stewardesses from the flight would undoubtedly be back in a few hours for the next shift. It was now or never. He could confront them directly and hope for an honest conversation, or he could take a more calculated approach, using his power as the owner to subtly pressure them into revealing more. But Jack wasn't sure he wanted to resort to that kind of tactic. He had always tried to keep his distance from the day-to-day operations, never wanting to be a micromanager, but now he was faced with a dilemma. How much did he really know about what was happening in his own company? As he sipped his drink, his mind kept coming back to one specific comment the stewardesses had made. They had mentioned something about his role in the airline's recent crisis, something he hadn't expected to hear. Jack had heard rumblings about financial troubles in recent months, but nothing concrete. Rumors, whispers from those who were too afraid to speak up publicly. Yet the stewardesses seemed to know something he wasn't aware of. It was a feeling he couldn't shake. What if the crisis wasn't just about bad luck or market fluctuations? What if it was something far deeper, something that could unravel everything he had worked for? He glanced at the clock. His next flight wouldn't depart for another 2 hours. Plenty of time to track down the stewardesses and see if he could get some answers. Jack stood up, determined to get to the bottom of this mystery. He walked through the terminal, trying to keep his thoughts focused on the task at hand. He needed to be calm, collected, and strategic. No matter what happened, he had to stay in control. As he rounded a corner, he spotted the two stewardesses near a coffee stand, chatting quietly. They didn't seem to notice him at first, and for a moment, Jack hesitated. This was the moment he had been waiting for, the opportunity to confront them, to find out exactly what they thought of him and the airline. But as he watched them from a distance, something stopped him. There was a familiarity in their laughter, an ease that suggested they weren't just colleagues, but friends. The thought of confronting them now, in front of each other, felt wrong. He couldn't risk making them defensive. Jack knew from experience that the best way to get someone to open up was to make them feel comfortable. He needed to be strategic about how he approached this. He decided to wait, watching them quietly from afar. He would bide his time and approach them when the moment was right. He had no idea what kind of response he would get, but one thing was clear. He was determined to uncover the truth, no matter how uncomfortable or painful it might be. For the next hour, Jack sat in the lounge, watching as the stewardesses came and went, speaking to other employees and customers. Their behavior seemed normal, professional even. There were no signs that they suspected anything was amiss. But Jack couldn't shake the nagging feeling that there was more to the story than he had realized. What had they meant when they spoke about the airline's crisis? What did they know about his involvement in the situation? And why had they chosen this particular moment to speak so openly? He couldn't help but wonder if he had been too naive for too long, too willing to trust those around him without truly understanding their motivations. By the time the stewardesses finally made their way back toward the gate for their next flight, Jack had made up his mind. He would speak to them, but on his own terms. He wasn't going to rush into the conversation, not yet. There was too much at stake. And the more he thought about it, the more he realized that this wasn't just about the stewardesses' opinions. It was about something much bigger. Something that could change everything. As the minutes ticked by, Jack could feel his patience beginning to wane. His thoughts were a whirlwind, each one more troubling than the last. The stewardesses were about to board their next flight, and Jack knew this would be his only chance to confront them. He stood up from the lounge, his heart pounding in his chest, and walked purposefully toward the gate. His mind was made up, no more waiting. He had to know the truth, even if it meant facing something he wasn't ready to hear. When he reached the gate, the stewardesses were standing by, preparing for their pre-flight duties. Their laughter had faded, replaced by a quiet professionalism, but Jack couldn't help but notice the subtle way they glanced at one another when they thought no one was looking. They were friends, yes, but there was something else in the air. A tension that Jack couldn't quite place. He took a deep breath and approached them. "Hey, can I have a word?" Jack said, his voice calm but firm. The stewardesses looked up, surprised to see him standing there. One of them, a woman with short, blonde hair, smiled politely. "Of course, sir. What can we do for you?" Jack's gaze flickered between them, searching for any sign of recognition, but they seemed perfectly unaware of who he was. He took another step closer, deciding to dive straight into the heart of the matter. "I've been listening to you both," he began, keeping his voice steady. "About the airline. About me?" The smile on the blonde stewardess' face faltered slightly, and Jack could see the tension in her eyes. The other stewardess, a tall woman with dark brown hair, stepped forward. "What are you talking about, sir?" "I'm talking about what you said on the flight," Jack continued, the words slipping out faster than he could stop them.
"About me."
"About the airline. You don't think I know, but I do." For a moment, neither of the stewardesses spoke. The silence between them felt thick, charged with an energy Jack couldn't quite place. He was ready for them to deny it, ready to hear them try to explain themselves, but instead, the blonde stewardess took a deep breath and nodded. "You're right," she said quietly.
"We did talk about you."
"We've been talking about you for a while, actually." Jack's heart raced. "Why?" The dark-haired stewardess stepped back, glancing around as though she were making sure no one else was listening. "It's not what you think," she said, her voice low. "We never meant for you to find out. But you've been different lately. People are starting to notice." "What do you mean, different?" Jack asked, his confusion growing. The blonde stewardess looked around nervously before speaking. "You've been making decisions that don't make sense. Things are falling apart, Jack. Our airline is in trouble, and you're too far removed to see it. The crisis, the rumors, they're real. And we're the ones who have to deal with it every day." Jack felt a cold shiver run down his spine. This wasn't just about their personal feelings toward him. It was about the very survival of the airline he had built from the ground up. He had been so focused on the bigger picture, the expansion plans, the profits, that he had ignored the cracks slowly forming beneath the surface. His own employees were suffering, and he had no idea. "So, what's going on?" Jack asked, his voice thick with disbelief. "What exactly are you telling me?" The dark-haired stewardess met his gaze, her eyes sharp and piercing. "There's a leak. We don't know who's behind it, but someone's been sabotaging the airline from the inside. Financial records are being altered. Plans are being changed without your knowledge. And we've been dealing with the fallout." Jack's mind reeled. He had suspected something was off, but he never imagined it would go this far. "But why didn't you tell me?" he asked, his voice rising. "We tried," the blonde stewardess said, her voice tinged with frustration. "But every time we tried to bring it up, you dismissed us. You were too busy with your own projects, too focused on the bigger picture. We were just the small fry, the ones cleaning up the mess." Jack felt his chest tighten. He had failed them. He had failed his team, the very people who were supposed to help keep his airline running smoothly. His mind raced as the pieces began to fall into place. The sabotage, the growing financial instability, the whispers among employees. It all pointed to one undeniable truth. Jack had lost control. Just as he opened his mouth to respond, a voice echoed from behind them. "I think it's time we stopped dancing around the issue." Jack spun around, startled. Standing there, at the entrance to the gate, was another figure, a man he didn't recognize at first. Tall, with dark hair and a sharp suit, he looked like someone who didn't belong in the airline world. But Jack's eyes widened as the realization hit him. "You?" Jack said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You're the one behind all of this." The man stepped forward, a smirk playing at the corner of his lips. "Surprised, aren't you?"
You should be.
"I've been watching you for a while, Jack. You were never going to see it coming." Jack's heart sank. "Who are you?" "I'm someone you should have noticed a long time ago," the man said, his tone mocking. "But no one ever pays attention to the quiet ones, do they? You've been too busy managing your empire, too wrapped up in your own ego to realize what was happening under your nose." The stewardesses exchanged uneasy glances, their faces pale. Jack could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him. "What do you want from me?" he asked, his voice shaking. The man laughed softly. "What I want everything you've built. And now that I've destroyed it, I think it's time for you to leave. Don't you?" Jack felt his stomach twist in knots. He had been betrayed, not by his employees, but by someone far closer to the company than he had ever imagined. The real enemy had been hiding in plain sight all along, pulling the strings, orchestrating the downfall of his entire airline. As the man stepped forward, Jack realized the true weight of his mistake. He had been so blind, so focused on his own vision, that he had overlooked the one thing that truly mattered, the people who worked alongside him. And now it was too late to fix what had been broken. The final twist: Jack wasn't just facing the end of his airline. He was facing the end of everything he thought he knew about the world he had built. And the hardest part? It was all his fault. Jack stood there, paralyzed by the revelation. The man before him wasn't just some opportunistic outsider. He was someone who had been working his way through the ranks for months, maybe even years. Jack had overlooked him, focused too much on the business and the empire he had built, assuming that everything was in good hands. But now it was clear that those hands had been stained with deceit. The sabotage, the leaks, the rumors, it was all a calculated plot to bring him down. And he had walked right into it without ever suspecting a thing. The man, standing with an air of smug satisfaction, took a step closer to Jack. "I've been patient, Jack. Watching you make all the wrong decisions, seeing you ignore the signs. You created this empire, sure. But you were too caught up in the bigger picture to realize the cracks were already there." Jack's mind spun, trying to process what he was hearing. The stewardesses, once his loyal employees, were now mere pawns in this twisted game. They were silent, but their eyes told the story. They had been part of this, maybe not willingly, but they had played their part. The weight of their betrayal settled heavily on Jack's chest. "I never wanted to hurt you," the dark-haired stewardess said softly, her voice trembling. "But you left us no choice. You've ignored us for too long. We tried to reach out, to make you see the problems, but you were always too busy. We didn't want it to come to this." Jack looked at her, the realization hitting him like a cold wave. "It was you, wasn't it?" he whispered. "You were behind the sabotage. You let him in." The stewardess nodded, her face full of regret. "We didn't have a choice. When the opportunity came, we thought maybe this was the only way to save the airline from falling apart.
But now,
I see it was a mistake." The man smirked, clearly enjoying the discomfort in the room. "It was never about saving the airline. It was about taking control, about making you realize just how out of touch you've been. And now look where we are. You've lost everything." Jack's heart sank. The weight of his failure pressed down on him with a finality he hadn't prepared for. His company, his airline, the empire he had spent years building, was slipping through his fingers. The idea of losing it all was almost too much to bear, but there was a bitter truth in the man's words. Jack had ignored the signs, thinking his vision was enough to carry the company forward. He had forgotten that the foundation of any business is the people who keep it running. For a long moment, the room was silent. Jack stood motionless, his mind racing as he tried to come to terms with what had just unfolded. The people he had trusted, the ones who had been by his side all this time, had turned on him. And now, there was nothing left but the cold reality of his mistakes. "I can't believe I let it go this far," Jack said quietly, his voice filled with a mixture of regret and disbelief. "I thought I could fix everything from the top down, but I never bothered to see what was happening beneath me." The dark-haired stewardess stepped forward, her voice soft. "It's not too late, Jack. You still have the power to turn things around. You just need to stop pretending like you're above everything. You have to start listening to the people who are actually doing the work. If you really care about this airline, you'll have to fight for it, not from the corner office, but from the ground up." The blonde stewardess nodded in agreement. "We can help you. We can fix this, but you have to stop being the man you've been for so long. It's time to be the leader this airline needs." Jack felt the weight of their words sink in. He had been a leader in his own way, but not in the way his company truly needed. He had been so focused on the outward success of the business that he had forgotten the core of what had made it successful in the first place: trust, communication, and respect. It was too late for him to go back and undo the damage, but it wasn't too late to make a change. It wasn't too late to take responsibility for the downfall and rebuild from the ground up. The man, who had been watching this exchange with increasing impatience, finally stepped forward. "Enough of this. I've already won. The airline's mine now." Jack's eyes narrowed, a sudden determination filling him. "You haven't won anything."
Not yet.
With a sharp movement, Jack pulled out his phone and made a quick call to his legal team. He didn't have all the answers yet, but he wasn't going to let this man take everything from him. It was time to fight back, to expose the corruption from within. The truth would come out. He would take control again, not by force, but by facing the reality of what had happened and using his influence to rebuild from the ashes. As he hung up the phone, Jack turned to the man who had orchestrated this entire betrayal. "You've made a huge mistake. You think you can take over my airline, but you've underestimated me. This isn't over." The man laughed, his expression mocking. "It's already over, Jack. You're finished." But Jack wasn't finished. Not yet. With the help of the stewardesses who had once betrayed him, Jack set out to uncover the full scope of the corruption. It wasn't easy. There were long hours, painful conversations, and difficult decisions, but in the end, the truth came to light. The man who had been pulling the strings was exposed for what he was: a fraud, a liar, and a manipulator. The sabotage was traced back to him, and with the legal evidence in hand, Jack took back control of his airline. It wasn't an easy victory, but it was a hard-earned one. And through it all, Jack learned the most valuable lesson of all: a company is only as strong as the people who make it. No amount of wealth or power could replace the importance of trust and communication within a team. As he stood in the boardroom, looking out at the employees who had stood by him through it all, Jack realized that the real victory wasn't in saving his airline. It was in rebuilding the relationships that had once made it great. Jack looked at the stewardesses who had helped him expose the truth. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for giving me a second chance." They nodded, their expressions sincere.
"We believe in you, Jack. We believe in this airline.
But this time, you need to believe in us too." And so, Jack set out to rebuild not just his airline, but the trust of the people who had always been there for him. The road ahead would be long, but he was no longer the man who had been too proud to listen. He was a new kind of leader, one who understood that true success isn't about control. It's about listening, learning, and growing together. And with that, Jack knew that no matter how hard the road ahead might be, he was ready for it.